Hey everyone. In this video, I want to talk about emotions, the unconscious, and if we have time, I want to talk about personality differences from the perspective of emotions and the unconscious. So I have recently been reading the work of Jaak Panksepp, and he was the founder of affective neuroscience, which is an amalgamation of a few different disciplines: animal behaviorism, experimental psychology, and neuroscience. It's a relatively new discipline, but I think that it offers a clear and materially based substrate for understanding different psychological phenomena. And so that's been occupying my mind recently, and that's also the perspective of emotions and consciousness and the unconscious that I'm going to take because there are different ways to talk about emotions. So according to affective neuroscience, particularly researchers such as Jaak Panksepp and, let's say, Antonio Damasio, your emotions can be thought of as dynamic systems that make anticipatory perceptions about the world. So they make predictions about what's going to happen. And they then take those predictions and bias the body to act and act in an adaptive manner. These systems are evolutionarily ancient, again, according to this perspective. They are shared with just about all mammals that have been studied. And you can also analyze the emotional systems at different hierarchical levels within the brain, within the nervous system. So you have your primary level, which is associated with instincts, it's associated with subjective experience. So it's not just that you're afraid, but it feels like something to be afraid. There's a visceral feeling, perhaps, that accompanies the perception and response related to the emotion of fear. The secondary level of analysis of emotions deals more with unconscious learning and memory. And from a behaviorist perspective, you can associate the secondary level of processing with conditioning. And then the tertiary level deals more with higher cortical parts of your brain that deals with the ability to reflect on the emotions. And another way to think of it is the primary process level deals with subjective experience, the secondary level deals with awareness of that experience, and then the tertiary level deals with the ability to reflect on the awareness of the experience of those emotions. So the primary emotions can be listed. There's at least 7 of them, according to, again, the researchers that I just named. They are seeking, fear, rage, lust, separation, distress, or panic, or grief. There's a few different labels for that one. Play and care. And these systems have been grounded through various neuroscientific and experimental psychological and animal behavior techniques in the brain, particularly in different parts of the subcortex. One of the ways that I've been thinking about trying to understand these different emotional systems, and this primarily comes from the work of Jordan Peterson and through him, various depth psychologists such as Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud. I've been trying to conceptualize these emotional systems, these 7 basic emotion systems, as subpersonalities. And for me, that's been useful for a few reasons, but it seems to make sense. If you think of a personality as an intentional system that exhibits a certain pattern of behavior, well, then you can apply, perhaps loosely, that definition to these different emotional systems. Because, for example, your fear system, it has a goal, it has its own sets of perceptions and adaptive behaviors, and it also has its own experience. And not only that, it also plays a major role in your capacity to encode memories and to retrieve them. So we could also say learning. That's not to say that each emotional system has its own memory system. I'm not trying to make that claim, but your emotions do play a major role in how you evaluate the world, how you generate memories, and also how you learn broadly. And so to think of them as subpersonalities, as living spirits, as entities, as archetypes, perhaps from a Jungian perspective, to me that fits within this broad framework, and particularly this depth psychological framework that asserts that you're not just you're not just an individual that exists seemingly in a unitary fashion. You consist of different subpersonalities, and you consist of different entities that are potentially autonomous and have their own goals. And if they are not brought into some sort of holistic unity, they can create contradictions and points of friction within your whole system as a personality. Much of the dynamics and the interactions of these subpersonalities occurs unconsciously. And when I say unconscious, I mean outside of awareness. In reading some of the work of Jock Panksepp, I'm coming to learn that there are different ways of talking about consciousness, whereas, or for example, there's phenomenal consciousness, which is subjective experience. There's access consciousness, which relates to awareness. And I'm still trying to not confuse myself as I'm trying to understand how these researchers are talking about emotions and experience and awareness. But when I say that these subpersonalities, these emotions, interact and act unconsciously, I'm meaning that they work outside of awareness. So when you are behaving in the world, or when you're perceiving certain phenomena in the world, it's very likely that your emotions are playing a major role without you even knowing it. And it also is the case that this happens to other people. And so that impacts how you experience other people and how you relate to them. When you're, let's say you have an intimate partner and you say something that you think is benign, but the other person takes offense to it and maybe they become enraged. And then you ask them, what is it that offended them? And maybe it lingered with them for a few minutes. And so you said a thing, they're processing it. Maybe they're not aware that they're processing it, but then 10 minutes later, perhaps they have an expression on their face, or they say something kind of peculiar that makes you think that something happened. And then when you can confront them about that, it might be the case that they don't know why they're in a mood, or they don't know why it is that they're coming off as angry or frustrated about something. Another example about how these emotional systems can be viewed as subpersonalities, particularly given the characterization that they have goals. You can think about times where you've been frustrated, but maybe you weren't sure why you're frustrated. Or again, times where you're interacting with a friend, or you're watching someone else who's frustrated, and then you ask them why they're frustrated and they don't know why. Frustration occurs usually when you were expecting to receive a reward or something that you liked, something that you desired, but then you didn't get it. The thing is, we can have unconscious goals that exist within us and they're operating all the time. And so the expression or the manifestation, or maybe the tertiary expression of frustration or an anger like emotion, it could be the result of not getting something that you wanted, even though you didn't know that you wanted it. So we talked about emotions, we talked about how they can operate unconsciously, and now we can talk a little bit about personality differences. So people vary in the sensitivity of these different emotional systems. Again, I listed the 7 of them in the beginning of the video, or a few minutes ago. We can take the care system, for example. People differ in their proclivity to bond with other people or to care about other people. They differ in their desire to nurture and empathize with other people. Under the Big Five paradigm, which from my understanding is the most widely accepted framework for personality, Jock Panksepp's care system has been correlated with the trait agreeableness from the Big Five paradigm. And so both of these things point to the dimension of social interaction. And one of the ways you can view personality differences, individual differences, is the fact that not everyone has that biological system operating at the same level of sensitivity. And so not all cues for social bonding will manifest to each person the same way. And also, people will vary in their responses to social bonding or their desire for social bonding. So that's just one example. You could go down the list, talk about differences in the seeking system, differences in the fear system, differences in the rage system, and understanding that we have these emotional systems and that we can view them as subpersonalities that can at times take over and possess us, for lack of better terms, and that people differ in their ability to navigate these different systems. That hopefully offers a conceptual framework, at least for understanding human behavior and perhaps understanding your own behavior. So, how does this relate to personality development? Many of the clinicians that I've read, such as Carl Rogers, Carl Jung, even Jean Piaget, who, from my understanding, wasn't a clinician, one of the ways they characterize an integrated personality is having an integrated mind, body, and set of emotions. So, what does it mean to integrate your emotions? One of the ways you can think about it, it might be easier to talk about what a disintegrated personality from the perspective of emotions looks like, and then we can talk about the ideal or where we would want to head. Imagine someone who suppresses all of their emotions to an extreme degree, where they don't allow themselves to feel anything. They perhaps deceive themselves in pretending to be calm all of the time, really, when they are actually depressed, or they're actually lonely, or they're actually anxious, or maybe they're actually angry at themselves, at someone, at their parents. So we don't want to suppress our emotions, and particularly from a psychoanalytic perspective, suppressing your emotions too much can lead to various sorts of pathology. Now, the other end of the extreme would be identifying with these emotions and allowing them to take over our entire personality, particularly in inappropriate times, let's say when we are engaging socially with other people. And so imagine someone who is overly anxious or they are overly fearful, and this prevents them from talking to other people, it prevents them from going out, or it prevents them from getting a job. So perhaps the proper integration of emotions into your personality has something to do with finding that sweet spot between suppression and identification. Carl Jung had this idea of complexes, and complexes were essentially sets of ideas that revolved around an emotional core. And I also think you could think of complexes as subpersonalities. And he believed that the more that you ignored a complex, the stronger it got, to the point where it could take over your conscious ego and make you do things that you normally would not do. And I'm sure many of us have had this experience either ourselves or with other people, where we or someone we're watching acts out of character, or they're not in their right mind, or they're not themselves. It's interesting that we use these, what are those, analogies, metaphors, but I think that there's some deep truth to them, and that's why I actually don't hesitate too much to use the word possess, because I do think you can get possessed by your emotions, and you can act in a way that's not usual, let's say. I lost my train of thought. Carl Jung said that one of the ways you wanted to deal with the complexes was by personifying them, having a conversation with them, and beating them in a rational debate, which is very interesting. But I think that there's something to it. It's not that, again, you want to. It's not that you want to identify with your emotions. It's not that you want to let your rage consume you all of the time and you're just nothing but an angry person. It's not that you want to suppress them either, because these emotional systems, these subpersonalities, evolved for a reason and they serve an adaptive purpose if they can be integrated into your larger personality and harmony can be created across all of the different emotions. And once you become a integrated person and you have those emotions in check, you are then integrated harmoniously with other people who also have different emotional systems. And I like the idea of having a conversation with these different subpersonalities within you and characterizing them and perhaps writing about them. When you're afraid of something, you can think to yourself about all of the times that you're afraid and what it feels like to be afraid. And do you notice patterns about what you perceive in the world? Are they specific objects, specific people, specific contexts that trigger that feeling of fear? And then you can also write about how you behave. And so you're personifying that system and you're giving it a character, you're giving it a life, and maybe you can understand its goals and its intentions. And then you can see how the goals and intentions of that system nest within your higher order goals as a whole person, as whoever it is that you're trying to be. You're trying to be a good husband, a good father, a good employee. How is it that maybe some of the goals of that system can help you be a better person overall? And how is it that maybe some of those goals are inhibiting your progress forward, and maybe you need to dispense with those goals, or maybe you need to articulate and explicitly elucidate why those goals are not necessary? And maybe they were necessary in the past. Maybe you were afraid of something in the past because there was an actual danger and you needed to be prepared for that. But maybe you're not in the past anymore, and maybe you're not in that environment. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that's a way to think about how to integrate your emotions and thus integrate your personality and move yourself along the path towards becoming someone that your younger self would appreciate. Yeah. Hope that makes sense. So thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.